Everyone. Thanks for listening in on our brown bag this morning. So today we are really pleased to have Beth Ratway from AIR come in and present some of her work on the implementation of social studies standards. And so Beth presented a shorter version of this presentation in our last brown bag, and we'll be diving in a little bit deeper on this brown bag. So Beth, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Ashley. Can you hear me? I have to be on two different things because, it's just a week. I'm going to put all the links in one so I'm not toggling between. So Ashley, after people come back in, and we get more people, can you just re-put those links back into the chat so everybody has access? Everything is in there. And then I will go to my presentation and share my screen. I think this is right. Make sure. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Okay. Yep, we can see it.
All right, let me make it into the slideshow. Okay. Well, welcome today. Oh, it's the 19th, isn't it? It's the wrong date. It's been a week, and it's only Wednesday, but I'm so glad to be back and talking to you about some of our your video. Okay. Sorry, I was getting the. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
It just said muted. Okay. I wanted to go back to what we discussed at the last at the TED Talk, where it was just a toe dip into the social studies curriculum review. What I'm going to share with you today in terms of research and have a little discussion about three different things of pieces of research that kind of intertwine that we've been working on, really grounded in this curriculum review landscape and the work that we've been doing. And the links are in the chat. So there's a link to our webpage, which is a social studies webpage. So it has a lot of these components on it, as well as some of the other work that we do. So if you need to know anything about specifically what we do in civics and social studies, it's on that space. And then we also have what we call a civics node, which is really doing some of the on the ground research that we partner with at AIR. So I'm just going to give you a quicker background of this landscape review, what we're doing with it, and how it impacts civics, and how I think it can impact the research field and your work moving forward, more importantly. So the why, and I'll make sure I get these slides out as well. But it's really important when we're talking about the work that I'm sharing with you is really about high quality instructional materials. We do work at AIR in social studies and civics, focusing on supporting standards revision at the state and then supporting implementation of those standards. And we're finding that right now we're really trying to help the field define what is high quality in social studies. It hasn't been done before. We partnered with EdReports, but we had to go back to kind of why. Why are they so important? So there's some of the research that is tagged in here about the importance of high quality instructional materials that I can definitely share with you. The three big components about what the research says, why it matters for students, particularly in civics and social studies, is critical thinking, right? It's really focusing on, if you can hone in on what high quality means, it really supports students' critical thinking skills. Improve student achievement, and then promoting equity by engaging all students. So really being thoughtful about all of these different components is why it matters and why we need to think about it in social studies, even though it's fairly complicated to think about high quality instruction materials in social studies, because they are all over the board, which is good and bad, particularly in the space of civics. For teachers, it's super important because it gives them the time to work with kids in the classroom. If they are assured that they have high quality instructional materials, it really impacts and gives them more time for deeper dives with students into content and the content that is grounded in their standards. So you have a link to the report, just a quick overview of the report. What we did was, just some background is that we partnered, or EdReports hired us to do some social studies work with them. EdReports is an organization that has built out over time rubrics and criteria to evaluate high quality instructional materials in ELA, math, and they dabble a little bit in science. So what they do is they do national reviews, or they work with states to review materials that are out there according to their criteria. Well, they didn't have social studies folks, so they partnered with AIR and with our folks to do some social studies work in Louisiana. Again, in order to do that work, we needed to figure out what was going on in the United States around high quality instructional materials in social studies. And so that's this report. This report is an analysis of what all states are doing at the time, at this point in time, around high quality instructional materials in social studies civics. What does it look like? What's missing? What are people using? What do state rubrics look like? What criteria are they looking at? So we did a whole analysis and interviews and got feedback from state social studies specialists, like the state social studies websites, which are interesting to look at and very dynamic. And we came up and developed this landscape scan, which took a while because we really wanted to continue to get feedback from folks to make sure at this point in time the right information is in there. So that's what you have in front of you. And what it has is it has the background. It has what people are using in terms of social studies products and materials, grade, coverage, what are they looking at? Are they looking at core versus supplementary, right? Are you buying a whole textbook set, or are you kind of supplementing all these different components together? So it gives you some data around what's happening, again, at this point in time. And then it talks about the market landscape. There's a little component on there that will be ever changing, that really talks about the political and social factors, legislation, those components that impact high quality social materials in social studies and civics. There's an overview comparing how states are currently doing it. Some states have their own rubrics already, their own criteria. They had it in the past. Some states didn't. So we looked at that, we analyzed those, we did a really deep dive into those, and I'll tell you what we did with that. And then looking at what the state conditions are, like what does it look like? Who adopts from the state level? Who adopts at the local level? Who doesn't give any feedback because they're super local control state? So it gives you some data in terms of the analysis about what does this look like in every state? What does it look like nationally? What are people using to really get kids engaged in civics in the K-12 space? So there's some good data in there that can be helpful in terms of making informed decisions moving forward about how do we make sure that teachers and kids have access to high quality instructional materials as we move forward, and how can we work together to do that? And what we decided with, lots of research reports and lots of reports, you can print out and put on a shelf. But we knew that this one changes every day. People are doing there's different laws, there's different rubrics, it's a nimble field, and it's continuing to grow. So what we decided to do is really use this as a talking point to work with the field to think about what it looks like now and how can we move forward together. And what we learned in this analysis as part of this report are these 7 kind of components that we'll talk about a little bit more as we go through this session. We need a definition of HQIM, and I'll tell you kind of where we're at with that. My biggest push, and I think it'll impact your work as well, is people say we don't have a set of common standards in social studies, and everybody says that that's a roadblock. My thing is that, because I've worked in so many states, there are commonalities in civic standards. First of all 50 states have a strand of civics in their standards. So that's one commonality. The other commonality is there is content that is common across states. And I'm going to talk to you about how we are moving forward with identifying that content. And we know that there's a high effect of incorporating HQIM. That's how I started this. It really impacts students if they have access and their teachers have access to really high quality instructional materials. And we're really trying to use this, particularly in the elementary space, is to get high quality materials in the elementary space, because right now we know that there's a marginalization of social studies. It's rarely exists sometimes at the elementary level. And we're really working together with other organizations to figure out how to get good materials into teachers' hands so they aren't building them because they have so many other things to do. And there's an increased use of OER in social studies, open educational resources. How are those high quality? How can we help folks really understand how to put things together so it's a coherent study of a civics curriculum? And then really, how do we help publishers prioritize content? What content should they be prioritizing to best meet the needs of our kids and prepare them in civics? So why is this important? One, I just said that. There's a map on our website, which is also a link, and you can click on it and it tells you what's required in all 50 states around civics, economics, geography. It goes through each state and kind of what's required at each grade. So there's a lot of data in there. We update that data, we update quarterly. So we go to websites, look at different things, see if things change. So that as updated as we can get it on a quarterly basis. This I'm just showing you that, and I'm sure you all know this, that as I said, all states and territories have a civic strand in their standards, and their standards are statutorily required for students to learn, right? So that's one common piece. So if we have that in common, how can we work together to make sure that there are really high quality materials out there are being developed in partnership with higher ed, in partnership with educators across states to really ensure that teachers have the right resources at their fingertips. So here are our recommendations as part of the report, things that we can do together, right, as a collaborative, and things that we should be thinking about. How can we come together and advocate for high quality civic materials and resources? There's a lot out there. How do we have common conversations about what is high quality and how do we get that into more teachers' hands? How do we work together to communicate the importance of high quality instruction materials, that they aren't just random acts of civic curriculum? Like, how do we help folks and communicate folks why this is important? Again, in social studies, many of these efforts to implement curriculum is really at the local level. Very rarely is it a state curriculum or state drop, like, here's your list of materials, here's what you should be doing. There are some, but more often it's at the local level. So how do we work with the local level, helping them understand these components and helping them have similar conversations about what high quality civics materials should be and how they should be developed? And then really the professional development. We know the research does say that that is the biggest impact, is to feed our teachers with the content and the skills and looking at these materials in order to use them in their classroom. So this is where those three things that I was talking to you about, how this kind of trickled down into a couple different really cool research projects and TA projects. So what we have done is we released the landscape report, and we have a 3-part webinar series because we want it as a point of conversation. We don't want to just put it out there. As I said before, as a research, this is what we've done. We want it to start a conversation. So we're doing a 3-part webinar. We did the first one, and the link to the recording is there. And what we did at that first one is we had a panel from RAND, from the American Historical Association, and from EdReports, talking about why high quality instruction materials are important and what they've seen in their research. AHA came out with a big report, and RAND came out with a big report of data about what they're seeing in the field of civics and social studies. So it was really a conversation with those folks. And then, this is what I wanted to share with you today too, is that as a result of this report, we did a deep dive into what criteria states were using to define high quality materials in civics. And we did an analysis, and then we found the commonalities of those and built a set of HQIM criteria for social studies and civics. It was a very iterative process, but it was a result of this report. And it has now there's a lot of different ways it's starting to be used in the field, and it's been super exciting. So I want to talk quickly a little bit about that. And the only other thing that we've done, the other thing that we've done is we've taken those criteria and we had a whole learning series with publishers have conversations about what this criteria means for their materials as they're building them. And we had some of the main publishers in civics there at the table to have conversations together about what this means for the field. So just so you know, and I gave you the link to this too, the criteria that have been developed and that are in conversations across the United States right now, that it's been with state social studies specialists. We're using it in Hawaii, the Virgin Islands, Alaska, New Mexico, Kentucky, and many others are using it to build their own rubrics. But these are the criteria that were developed based on the landscape report research, as well as we have a whole document that I can share with you about the research behind each of these 6 components and why they're important in social studies and civics. So one is standards alignment, one is social studies practices, one is representation and perspectives, usability, instructional supports, and assessment practices. And so these are, we've built multiple tools to help educators and states and publishers look at their materials and do deep dives into these 6 criteria as they build out their materials. What's next for us, particularly at AIR, our next steps are to continue to facilitate the webinar series. So our next one's going to be, we're waiting till after Civic Learning Week, till the end of the month of March for sanity reasons, but we're going to do the second in the series of conversations about this landscape report on the use of HQIM and standards in social studies and civics. We're going to talk about why content is important, talk about the research there. We're going to have the Knowledge Matters campaign talk about that, particularly at the elementary. Then we're going to have a panel of the content organizations from across the content of social studies. So iCivics is going to be representing the civic space. And then we have the National Center for History Education, Geography Education, and the Center for Economic Education. They're going to talk about the importance of content because that's their space. Then we're going to share something super exciting that I think you would be excited about as well. It's that commonalities piece. So because I've been fighting and really, not fighting, but really promoting that there are common elements across all 50 states and territory standards in social studies, particularly in the civics and US history space. So we built a tool where we just finished putting all of the state standards in there, and we can do queries about what common elements are in there, what's the difference, what are the common skills. So we're going to present this for the first time, like the use cases for this data at the webinar in March. It's really, really interesting. We're doing some scans right now, particularly in the civics and US history space about what is in common, and I think that that can really help our work moving forward. The way it's connected to this report and the way it's connected to the HQIM work is number one, right? Standards alignment. If we can identify what is in common across states, we can move forward together in support, in having conversations about materials, the development of materials, you know, really understanding what the differences are in states. It's a set of data that's going to help us make better decisions rather than, oh, this state does it this way, oh, this state does it this way, now I have to go do it in this state. In ELA and math, right, they have some common language, some common standards, even though they're all kind of moving a little bit away to their own standards. They had that opportunity. We are blessed with being different and having different ways that people are writing their standards and putting content in the standards. So we kind of needed to do it backwards and now look at what everybody has written and be able to look at what the commonalities are. This tool also is going to continually be updated, right? So we're going to continually update it as states are revising their standards. So that's something we're going to be talking about at this webinar and releasing kind of some of the use cases for that data. And it all came from the needs we saw in this landscape report. And then the third session will probably be in April or May, depending on timing, and we'll talk about the impact of the marginalization, the lack of focus or hyper focus on social studies and civics, depending on where you're at, and how that impacts and how HQIM materials can impact that. and we're going to continue to revise this report based on what we see the field moving towards and that work. All right, let me see. Stop sharing. Now I can see you. Let me see any messages. So that is what I had to share with you, and I think so. All the links are in there, and you have our website, which has a lot of different kind of components on it, just focusing on the social studies and civics aspect. The landscape report, which was the grounding for this work. It was the grounding set of data to say, hey, this is what we need next. The map can give you some data if you're ever looking about what's happening in each of the 50 states, knowing that's updated every quarter. You have the recording from the first webinar if you wanted to see the release of the landscape report, and then our HQIM material that we're using across the board in many different ways. Again, that's a blessing that we can do in civics and social studies, because there isn't like one common way that we should be looking at materials. It's more of a formative look using the HQIM tool to give feedback, to have conversations about common elements around HQIM and social studies and civics.